This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
Archaeology, the term that might conjure up visions of faraway lands and adventure, of finding long-lost antiquities in a desert or perhaps a jungle. But what might surprise you, North Carolina's very active archaeology scene.
What happened here literally changed the course of American history. It changed the American frontier. That changed world history.
The hard and often grimy fieldwork takes teams of devoted individuals.
I took a week off from work so I could come out here and work.
Not every excavation takes place in a farmer's field.
We need to be studying urban environments. What are people doing in the mid-1800s in the Piedmont backcountry area in a city environment?
And in Mecklenburg County, archaeology field schools like this attract students seeking more than a 9-to-5.
Someone who is intensely curious and has critical thinking skills.
To me, I would say it is glamorous work because it's not in a cubicle.
Join us as we dig in and discover answers to a 500-year-old mystery thanks to a piece of pottery. Meet folks who take vacation time to explore, those who'd rather get dirty here than head to the ocean. Live in an older home? You never know what's just below the surface in your own backyard. It's called urban archaeology. And we'll visit a pre-Civil War plantation that's now a lab for future archaeologists. That's all coming up on Trail of History. In the North Carolina foothills, just outside Morganton, roadside wildflowers sway in the breeze. It's late spring, and along Henderson Mill Road, crops soak up the sun. If not for the white tents off in the distance, those that pass by this farm might not even give it a second glance.
I think we're done with the edge.
Yeah,
You guys start to meet later.
Welcome to the Berry Site and Warren Wilson College's Archaeology Field School, led by Dr. David Moore.
Everything's perfectly symmetrical. I don't think it's 20th century.
The site gets its name from the Berry family, who've owned the property for more than 150 years. But Moore has another name for the land, one that connects this land to the residents some 500 years ago.
And this field right here is the location of a Native American town called Joara. It's spelled various ways, most often Joara, which in Spanish might have been pronounced Juara, but it's also spelled Xualla, which would be pronounced Schwala.
Just over 3 decades have passed since Moore first started excavating the Berry Site, literally digging for answers to what happened right here 500 years ago. But this type of research, an ongoing archaeological dig, is expensive.
Funding is always a challenge. It's pretty expensive to do this work.
So each year, Moore and his team host the field school, and each year about 40 to 50 people pay a little more than $400 each for a chance to get their hands dirty, break a sweat, and possibly find a bit of history.
Yes, people actually pay to take part and work out here in the sun, and it's how we fund the work.
And what does it mean to be part of an archaeological laboratory?
We tell folks, you're not going to do complicated archaeology. That takes a lot of training. But you'll see everything that happens on the site. And if someone finds something, you're going to see it. If we make a great discovery, you're going to hear about it and see it.
The school, as you might expect, attracts students from Warren Wilson College. Students like Alex Ardagna, who on this day found more than he was expecting.
It's like a ceramic piece of Spanish pottery. It's pretty exciting. I didn't think I'd find anything, at least today, because we were just finding rocks and pottery pieces, and then this came out of nowhere.
But Moore adds his field school offers something most don't.
Most archaeologists work with field schools with their students from colleges and universities. We take people here from high school age to retired folks.
It might surprise you to learn a few of these folks, like Linda Finley, consider this fun in the sun. For her, this is vacation, where she can learn, discover, and engage.
I am from Breaux Bridge, Louisiana. I'm an importer for an industrial packaging company in Louisiana. I took a week off from work so I could come out here and work.
And retiree Tom Green comes from across the country for this experience.
I was an IT project manager Worked for Starbucks at their corporate headquarters in Seattle for over 13 years. And my wife now likes getting me out of the house, so here I am. Digging, getting dirty, sweating.
The 2019 field school marks Tom's third quote-unquote vacation spent at the Berry site.
I've always found archaeology interesting. So 3 years ago, I found this place online, and I figured if they've been excavating here for over 30 years, chances are there's something going on. And I always find some neat stuff, and it keeps me coming back.
The first thing we found a lot of bits of pottery. Yesterday we were finding a lot of pieces with symbols scratched on them. Today I found, looks like it's a piece of a pipe.
The work involves a gentle touch with a shovel to break the earth, and an eagle eye at the sifting screen to release its historical bounty.
That's nice.
As the ground continues to reveal its secrets.
It's very exciting. This morning we've had a Native American arrowhead, a couple nice scrapers, some nice pottery.
All artifacts connecting this land to an ancient culture.
These were sophisticated people who dealt with other organized tribes probably for an area of over 200 miles. They participated in what we call a Mississippian culture. They're highly organized socially and politically. These folks were farmers, and this is the best kind of land to be farming, so that's why they lived here.
Early in his career, Moore obtained permission from the Berry family to excavate on their property.
My task was to study the pottery and see if I could date different sites. It's frankly like finding a needle in a haystack. I was very lucky when I was out here in 1986. I could only work up here, and if they had sent me down to that end of the field, we never would have found this.
Rediscovering a 16th century Native American town would be exciting enough for most archaeologists.
You always dream about it.
But what Moore found was something else.
We have identified the locations of 5 burned buildings at the end of the field over here. We think those are the buildings that his men lived in, and then the fort is right over here.
Yeah, you heard correctly. They found evidence of a Spanish fort.
It's a little over 30 meters long, about 26 meters wide. It's about the size of a modern professional basketball court. So it's the first permanent European settlement built in the interior of the United States. 18 years before the lost colony in Roanoke, 40 years before Jamestown. That's a pretty amazing thing to think about. The Spaniards came under Captain Juan Pardo in late December of 1566. Pardo had an army of 125 men. He ultimately left 30 men here at this site where they built the first fort. Pardo ultimately built 6 forts between the coast of South Carolina and the mountains of East Tennessee.
Pardo named the outpost Fort San Juan, but in 1986, Moore didn't realize he'd located it, even though he'd had the very first piece of evidence in hand. That evidence, a piece of pottery that wasn't Native American, and in a case of mistaken identity, he didn't think much of it and filed it away. But a few years later, his colleague, Dr. Rob Beck, found a similar piece.
And he took the pottery to the archaeologists at UGA, and they said it was 16th century Spanish pottery. And I said, when he called me, I said, I've got stuff just like that, but it had been identified by folks here in North Carolina as 18th century Moravian pottery. And there's some similarities, plus no one here ever expected to have 16th century Spanish pottery here. But in fact, it was. I tell my students and the people that come out here that archaeology is my personal time machine. And having that tangible artifact in your hand just connects you to the past in a way that I love to read about history, but it doesn't connect me to the way that seeing these artifacts. But even more exciting is to be able to get below the disturbed soil to see the remains of the actual village that was here and the remains of the fort. And that's what archaeology is all about, is being able to contextualize, find out where these artifacts came from to really be able to understand them better.
So you might be asking, what happened to Fort San Juan in the end?
What probably happened was they got tired of supporting the soldiers who weren't really contributing anything to the village. There may also have been improprieties with Native American women. The fort was built in 1567. It was destroyed and the soldiers were killed sometime in April or May of 1568. It only lasted 18 months.
According to Moore, only one Spaniard survived to tell the tale, and with the attack on Fort San Juan, archaeologists theorized the Native Americans of Jawara changed the trajectory of the New World.
Honestly, if this fort had been held by the Spanish, it is unlikely that they would have allowed the English to get a foothold on the coast of North Carolina. What happened here literally changed the course of American history. It changed the American frontier. That changed world history.
"20 miles as the crow flies southeast of the Berry site, you'll find the town of Lincolnton. Established in 1785, it's the county seat of Lincoln County. Today, downtown Lincolnton is home to dozens of businesses, restaurants, and the county courthouse. And a short walk away from the square stands the Michael Butt Brown Presley House. It's a mouthful, we know. Here's why.
So the house was built, we believe, by Conrad Michael, because he was the first owner of the property. And then John Michael came in a few years later. And then after that, we had the Dr. Zephaniah Butt, and he came here like in 1847, I think was the year he got the property. And then in the 1850s, we also had Dr. Brown who came in, and then after him, there was Dr. Presley.
Dr. Presley's descendants still own the property, and for the most part, this 200-year-old house has simply been a home, with one exception.
It was a residence, but it was also used as a doctor's office. If you actually look at the front of the building on Main Street, it looks like there were 2 front doors, and one of those actually leads into a room off the hallway. We think that was for receiving people into the doctor's office, so they didn't have to go into the main hall of the house.
But it's not the structure we're interested in, it's what's going on out back that brought us to the house with such a long name.
Maybe like a perfume bottle. That would be amazing.
It's urban archaeology and the things that you might find in your own backyard.
Sometimes you find artifacts that are very old, sometimes you find modern day artifacts.
It's a project for the Lincoln County Historical Association.
Yeah, we're just trying to preserve as much as we can of what's left of the archaeological record in Lincoln County.
Archaeologist January Costa heads up the dig team.
This is an urban downtown Lincolnton, North Carolina situation. We're in the backyard. We're actually behind the kitchen. There's an attached kitchen to the house. And what we think we have found is possibly 2 previous kitchens. With the house being built in 1819, we believe there would have been a separate summer kitchen, which was typical of the time period.
And her team is made up of both trained archaeologists and volunteers.
I had no archaeology experience at all.
But Ed Little now has a decade of experience volunteering on dig sites like this. It's hot, dirty work, but something keeps him coming back.
Just not knowing what you're going to find. The surprise, just, what comes next.
And Lori McCourt drove up from Columbia, South Carolina with her daughter Macy to volunteer.
Well, we both have an interest in history. She's kind of starting to understand what our history is in Lincoln County. I grew up on what they call the old home place in Krause, North Carolina, which is about 5 minutes down the road. It's interesting to see her love doing the things I like to do, and I love to dig in the dirt and find things. So it's been exciting that she has an interest in it.
It's a lot of work, and the more people we have, the more we can get done faster.
They've opened up an area around 20 feet by 16 feet. It's methodical work, primarily using small hand tools.
In an area like here, we start out with shovels, and then we move to trowels. And out here, with as much brick as we have, we really want to be careful, because that's something that can happen if you were not thinking about it and just kept using your shovels. Well, if you push down on that shovel, you can break a pot. A whole pot could be sitting there, and now you've got pieces of a pot.
Teams work to sift the soil, bag what they find, then either clean and identify found items on site or save them for later.
We are finding lots of coal, and a lot of that's associated towards the back of where we think the kitchen went to. We've got the animal bones, I'm not really sure what animal bones we have yet, but some of them did have cut marks on them, so they were definitely used, which fits right for a kitchen area. We've had lots of pottery, you know, your plates, your bowls, dishes, things like that. We've got glass, some window glass, some bottle glass.
They're finding lots of old nails, the occasional marble, and what appears to be a piece of a clay tobacco pipe. Costa says it's not surprising to find these items. Prior to municipal trash collection, garbage often accumulated in the backyard.
Nobody thought we would find anything. Everything's gone, you know, in Lincolnton. No, it's not. We found all kinds of things that can start showing us, you know, what people were using and, you know, buying and purchasing and all kinds of stuff. So.
And Costa says doing urban archaeology is just as important as similar work done in faraway places.
We need to be studying urban environments, especially for here, because for me, I'm thinking, well, it's not been done. That's why it's extremely important here. What we're finding here has been extremely useful to the data that's out there for archaeology, for the urban environment. You know, what are people doing in the mid-1800s in the Piedmont backcountry area in a city environment? The whole point's to connect the dots, but you know, we're still missing information. But the more information we find, the closer we get to our story.
And sometimes the story takes an unexpected turn.
And then we found the coral. That was the cool thing. The coral we found, that was last year. And it's actually, we found it in the corner of what would be our kitchen. And when we found it, we weren't really, I knew it was coral, but I didn't know what kind of coral it was. So I contacted my friend Joe Bagley up in Boston. He's the city archaeologist up there. And he sees it all the time up there. And he said, well, that's staghorn coral. And he says it comes from the Caribbean. And he's like, well, you know, yeah, because most of the slaves that were coming into our area were actually coming from the Caribbean. And so they would apparently bring these items with them. And a lot of times you see them buried with other little, possibly rocks or other items. They would bury them in the corners of their houses or homes for protection. I started crying because, like I said, it really, for it to have been something that from that far away that I definitely know was associated with a slave, you know, I think that's one of the truly important things that we can, if we can try to come up with more information with that, it makes this all even more worthwhile.
So the next time you're digging in your backyard, working in the garden, don't be surprised at what you might find, and Mother Earth reveals her secrets. Kids often say, when I grow up, I'm going to be a teacher, a doctor. The list goes on and on. For those that say archaeologist, well, there's a school for that. Each summer, Dr. Alan May runs the UNC Charlotte Archaeology Field School.
It's the same reading that we had yesterday. The Archaeological Field School, the emphasis on school, is a training area for understanding and doing archaeological techniques. It's learning how to use the shovel in a way that you're not destroying the artifacts that you're trying to recover. It's learning how to use a trowel to pull across the ground in such a way that you're cutting a surface that hasn't been exposed before. You use your trowel to create a clean surface that then can be photo documented, mapped, and interpreted on the basis of our understanding of how archaeological sites are formed.
When not attending Florida State, Amy Boyland calls Indian Trail home.
Today we're digging 2x2 meter squares.
Boyland says she followed her older brother's advice when choosing a major.
He suggested that I do anthropology as my major. It would allow me to be able to travel around in the future, and he was a big inspiration for me to decide to do anthropology as my major.
And archaeology was a natural fit for her.
When I'm not digging, I like to go to the beach. And that's kind of where I'm wanting to get my open water diving certification so I can take archaeology and do underwater archaeology. To me, it's glamorous, and though it's not glamorous to everyone, there are a bunch of bugs and ticks, and it's sweaty and hot out here right now, but honestly, I'd rather be doing this than anything else. It's not in a cubicle. My motivation is to keep learning. I really enjoy school. I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I'll admit that.
And that level of curiosity and passion is what many teachers look for in their students.
Someone who is intensely curious and has This probably more important than the other are critical thinking skills. The importance of emphasizing those critical thinking skills allows you to evaluate the quality of the information that you're receiving, whether it's at an archaeological dig or something that's presented at the 6 o'clock news. You're learning something in a series of tools that will help you outside of the classroom, outside of the archaeological dig. Probably the more important parts of what we do is associated with those small, fine tools that help us recover and interpret the material that's coming out of the ground. So it's trowel and dustpans and little dental picks or bamboo picks if you find bones, so that you don't scrape the bone up with something metal. And there's a lot more to it than just pick and shovel.
This field school takes students out of the classroom and gives them the opportunity to excavate at the historic Holly Bend plantation. Sometime between 1795 and 1800, Robert Davidson, the son of American Patriot Major John Davidson, built his home on 400+ acres gifted to him by his father. The research conducted by the field school provides some of the missing pieces to what life was like on the plantation.
We're recovering material that, when cleaned up, will allow us to add plenty to our understanding of the picture here, because the Davidsons were busy making a living from 1800 until he died in 1854 and she died in 1865. This was a big plantation. This was a large operation. And their daily activities were making sure that everything got done that needed to be done to make this farm successful. So they weren't keeping diaries.
Kind of in the unit that I'm working in, we have a glass, a goblet, or a wine glass of some sort. We're gonna map where it is exactly, because archaeology is ultimately destructive. We're gonna take it out of the ground, and you're gonna have to only know where it was based off of going back in and checking the paperwork.
Abigail Bithell finished her master's program in May of 2019 and returned to the field school, this time to volunteer.
I actually do bioarchaeology, so I look at human skeletons in archaeological contexts.
She says the field school offers her and the other students a chance to build an archaeological collaborative that can last years after a dig.
I mean, it is kind of like hot and heavy physical work. Not everybody really wants to come out and do this. So there's a personal level where I wanted to do it. I wanted to get more experience. But then there's a level where I just we know all these people. When you're like an archaeologist in an area, you kind of know all the other archaeologists around.
For the aspiring archaeologist, you may wonder about finding work after graduation.
A lot of times someone will say, well, can they make a living doing this? And the answer is yeah. One of the kind of shifts that's gone on is that there's more archaeological work being done in the private sector than in the universities. There's a lot of people that are doing cultural resource management, a couple of companies that do that, and they derive their labor force from field schools and degree programs like UNC Charlotte's.
And there's a lot of soapstone.
Most everyone enjoys a good story, and each scoop of dirt and shake of the screen gives us more pieces of our history, of who was here hundreds of years ago and how they lived.
We don't have photographs. So, if somebody wants to sit down and say, what were people doing? What did they like? Well, the only way to figure it out, yes, you've got your estate records and things like that, but the actual physical objects coming out of the ground to look at and study, that's going to give you your information.
I think there's always relevance to the past. We certainly have plenty of problems today, but they're problems of the same nature that our ancestors dealt with. If we don't try to understand the past, it's like not understanding people of different cultures. You become blinded in your understanding of not just your society, your world, but the entire world.
So next time you drive past a field or start to plant a garden, think about what other pieces of the story are still buried, waiting to be rediscovered, and connect us to the world. Who knew archaeological research had taken such a foothold in North Carolina, where the search for answers continues?
a production of PBS Charlotte.